Welcome to the Hall of Heroes History Podcast. This is episode number 2. Thanks for joining us. This is Alan Stewart. He is the curator here at the Hall of Heroes Museum here in Elkhart, Indiana, and my name is John Osborne. Just a recap on what we did last time, Alan and I went over origin stories.
Exactly.
So you can go back and check that one out. You can see why he is the person that you want to get your information from. And you can see our origin stories. You can see we touched on Marvel and we touched on DC. Yep. So now comes the fun stuff. Right.
Now we're deep diving history.
Yeah, and that's going to be really cool and a lot of fun for you guys today. That's going to be fun for us. And here at the Hall of Heroes, we have all these different cases, and it's in timeline order that you and I put together a year and a half ago or so. And so we're going to kind of take from that and jump back and forth to Marvel and DC. And so I just want to get you and let you know what we're going to be doing here on the podcast. So episode 2, this is the Marvel deep dive at the very beginning. We're going to find out a lot about that today. So I hope you enjoy it. So Alan, let's start out with something that's actually not Marvel.
Exactly. Yes.
It is called Marvel, but it's not. But it's a very interesting piece that we have.
This is a neat piece. Craig, Craig Emmerich, who used to be one of our board members, found this, and he found 2 of these. It's this telephone you see here, and it was a company. The company was called Marvel, and it was a telephone company in New York. You know where Marvel Comics, but it was Timely Comics, was based, and he found 2 of these original old Marvel telephones, and he thought it would be really cool to put it with our Timely Golden Age section. I kind of agreed. I just thought it was just like an interesting historical lark, to have that. So you can see this on exhibit at the museum, this Marvel phone from the early 1930s, which predates Timely, which originated in 1939. But yeah, it's an interesting piece. It's an old phone, but it says Marvel on it. It's kind of cool. It's one of those cool, quirky things. That we kind of threw in there.
And we just kind of thought that would be fun for you to see that even before Timely and Marvel came about, there was a company called Marvel that was putting out telephones, and is it a real phone?
It's a real phone.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, it's a real phone. It's an old timey phone.
All right. Pretty cool. All right.
And just kind of to recap what we kind of talked about in our last episode, Timely Comics, which later, of course, we now know as Marvel today, but originally started as Timely Comics, was created by Martin Goodman in 1939. Martin Goodman actually ran a pulp novel company in the early 30s. And then with, of course, the rise of Superman, that's what really launched comic books on the main stage. And so, Martin Goodman's like, all right, hey, we want to do some superhero comic books.
Right.
In 1939, which is the same year Batman comes out by DC Comics. And so, of course, they, they do Marvel Comics #1, which we do not have a Marvel Comics #1 in our collection. We do have a number 10 right here. You can see this is our earliest Marvel comic, is Marvel Comics #10, and that came out in 1940. But yeah, it's early Human Torch, Submariner, and we kind of talked about that. You had Carl Burgos, who created the Human Torch. You had Bill Everett, who created the Submariner. But then there were also some other characters introduced. There was Kazar the Jungle Man was introduced. There was Paul Gustins, created this character called the Angel, who was a detective. He didn't wear a mask.
Right, but that wasn't
not the X-Men, right?
Not the X-Men Angel.
He can't fly.
Right.
But he would like patrol like the subways of New York City, and he had like a brown, blue and red costume.
All right.
And a cape.
Very superhero.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he had a cape. In fact, it's funny, you see all the DC characters in this time wore capes.
Yeah.
None of the Marvel characters did.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever thought about that.
I never really think
about it. But the early
it.
Marvel characters did not wear capes. Human Torch didn't have one. Submariner didn't have one. Captain America didn't have one. The Angel did, though.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was one that did, and then Miss America, who's introduced later, which is kind of their version of Wonder Woman.
Okay.
She also had a cape.
Right.
But they usually, DC, all their characters had capes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost every DC character.
Well, it
but
kinda
Marvel,
makes-
very few of their characters had capes. It was so weird.
Well, I mean, the costume gives it away that you're a superhero.
Right.
But the cape kind of gives you this almost elite status.
Right.
Where it gives you that one up, like I'm wearing a cape, like a
Right.
Duke of Earl or something.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Uh-huh.
so it kind of puts you up on that other level, and you kind of look at them like this, where the Marvel characters were more street level.
Pretty much, yeah,
You know,
exactly,
that kind of
exactly,
thing,
yeah.
yeah.
And like with Submariner Human Torch, we were talking earlier that they were elementals.
Yes.
Yeah,
water, fire, and water.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And this is when the Human Torch was an android. We talked about that a little bit last time, and he had a sidekick named Toro.
Right.
Before we get into like
and then Caphead Bucky.
Caphead Bucky, stuff like that. So so this is our earliest Marvel.
Yeah, this is our earliest Marvel, and you can kind of see on the side here. So there's Submariner's got the cover, but you've got Human Torch right there. Here's the Angel right here. Electro, not the Spider-Man Electro, but he's like a robot, and then Kazar down here. One of the other characters that gets introduced a few issues later in Marvel Comics is a character called the Vision, but he's not the android Vision that we know. He was an alien from like another dimension. He would like show up in like a puff of smoke from this other dimension.
That's cool.
But he was green and red, though. He looks very similar to the android Vision character.
So this is interesting to me, as we were talking about this earlier and discussing what we were talking about on the podcast, is that we have all these characters: Angel, Human Torch, Vision.
Marvel's notorious for using names.
Right, but I'm saying they started with those names, and then they kind of found a better way for the characters and used them differently. So I think that's just very
they create brand new characters with the same name. And we're going to see that because, we're talking about Marvel in the 40s and 50s. And when we get to our 50s segment later, we're going to talk about the first appearance of the Hulk.
Yeah, but it's
not the Green Goliath that we know.
Right,
exactly. So it's the same thing. Marvel just has this habit of reusing names. They're notorious for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But so when Marvel Comics #1 came out, so interesting. So the original print run was about 80,000 copies. 80 to 90,000 was the print run. And it sold out immediately.
Oh, wow.
So Martin Goodman did another run 10 times. Now 800,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's like a black mark on the inside of the book that you can tell if it's that first or that second. Doesn't say first print, doesn't say second print.
There's just
because that's not how they did it back in the day.
Well, yeah, they did. Yeah.
Yeah, there was one little black mark on there that is the difference between the original
80,000 and the
800,000. Exactly.
Which is really cool.
So, it was. So that. Marvel Comics 1 was nearly 1 million copies that they did. And so what happened is, Martin Goodman, then he decided, because he was getting a lot of his material from like New Funnies Inc. and stuff like that. And so because of the success of Marvel Comics #1, he was like, okay, I need to have my own in-house artists and staff and things like that. So he goes on his hiring spree. And he already had Carl Burgos, creator of Human Torch. He had Bill Everett, creator of Submariner. He had Paul Gustins, the creator of Angel. But his first 2 hires was Joe Simon.
Okay.
And Joe Simon then brought Jack Kirby with him.
Okay.
So the Simon Kirby were a team right out of the gate, and
you had a all-star team right out of the gate.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, Goodman had just an amazing talents right there with these guys, and of course, 2 years later, then you have, their greatest creation, Captain America #1 in 1941 by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. The first hires of these guys, boom, they just knock it out of the ballpark.
Right.
With Captain America. Interesting thing about Captain America is he is not the first character in red, white, and blue. That was the Shield.
Yes.
By Arch Comics.
Yeah.
And so what happened, but Captain America is the most famous.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is, you look at the cover, you've got Captain America punching out Adolf Hitler. Real life supervillain trying to take over the world.
Right. But he's punching out Hitler before America gets involved.
9 months before Pearl Harbor. So Pearl Harbor happens in December of 1941. This comic book is dated March of 1941. The book probably came out in February because they always put a month later so they can sit on the newsstands for up to 2 months. This is always how it's always been done with comic books. So the book actually came out probably in February of 41.
All right.
But it's cover dated March 41. And then one of the interesting things about this, and we're kind of deep diving World War II history, is the Sentinel Liberty badge. So this was advertised in the Captain America #1 comic books. You could order the Captain America, sidekick club, pretty much. Yeah, right. It was a Captain America Sentinel Liberty, club, and you would join this club, and you would get like a card, a certificate. You'd get the brass Captain America badge, and these brass badges are extremely rare because if you think about this, they only produce them for a few short months,
right?
Because then we enter World War II.
Yeah,
all the brass is then being used for ammunition and shells and for the war effort, and so you don't have, so they have to stop producing these.
Right.
So, you don't have the Captain America Sentinel Liberty badge.
Plus, what year did you say it was from? 1941?
41.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got to imagine that those things aren't just going to find themselves in 2025.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like the distance alone of that, being able to keep it and, preserve it and then pass it along and pass it along.
Right.
So you're not going to get a lot of these. And so it's very rare and very cool.
And at that point, people didn't have the collector's mindset like we do now. People just threw stuff away.
Yeah.
The other thing that they did is they had the scrap metal and the scrap paper drives to help the war effort.
So
these things were turned into scrap metal drives.
Right.
Yeah. And then same thing with these rare comic books. This is why this is $1 million comic book, is because so many of these were turned in. They weren't, considered collectible.
Right.
They were just like, okay, I'm reading it. I'm throwing away its kid stuff. It's garbage.
Exactly.
It's funny books. That's what they call them, funny books.
Yeah.
And so people didn't keep them. But during the war effort, during the scrap paper drives, people were bringing comic books. They were bringing newspapers. I mean, comic books were treated like a newspaper. You read it. I'm done with it. I pitch it.
Right.
Yeah. But they were encouraged to turn them into the scrap paper drives during World War II. So that's why a Cap 1 is so rare. And that's why our museum and the Library of Congress are the only two museums that has this rare artifact.
Right.
And the same thing with the Sentinel Liberty badge. And I don't know if the Library of Congress has one. We do.
Yeah. In your face.
Yeah. Well, we don't know it for sure. But it was just great talent that they brought. Now, one of the people that was brought in 42, so two things happened in 42. Okay. So we enter the war effort. Captain America takes off in 41. Huge. Most popular character.
Right. Why would it not be?
Submariner, Human Torch, kind of a back seat. I mean, they're still, but they're like, just like DC is. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman are the main three.
Right.
Same thing here. Submariner, Human Torch, Captain America. Main three. They're the icons of the company. Yeah. So just really interesting. So in 42, two more people enter, Timely Comics.
Yeah.
The first is Stan Lee, who was Martin Goodman's nephew on his wife's side.
Okay.
Not by blood, but by marriage.
Okay.
He hires Stan as a young man as an office boy. And so he enters in 42. The other person that enters is actually a very dear friend of ours. I'm going to grab that.
Yep.
Alan Bellman. And Alan Bellman was one of our board members here at Hall of Heroes. And Alan was like he was like my adopted grandfather. And anytime I talk about Alan, I try not to choke up because he was very dear to me.
I know, he meant a lot to me.
Yeah, Alan passed away in 2020. He was 95 years old, was the oldest living comic book artist in the world at that time. Alan was one of our board members. Like I said, he was like my adopted grandfather. I went with him at cons for years as his handler, his moderator on stage. He joined our board. We have a lot of great stuff of Alan's here. This is a photo of me and Alan along with Red Brown Captain America and Dean Cain Superman. They were, here at our first Comic-Con in 2017. So this was a picture taken of us together at the original museum. Alan, probably the last 6 months of his life, was sending me stuff. To keep, so he threw out the pitch at the Marlins baseball game in 2017. We have the autographed ball here. These are a sample of letters from so just to kind of put in time. So in the 40's, Alan and Stan Lee were a creating team.
Yes.
They worked on the Captain America comic books together during World War II for the soldiers. So they were very close, worked together until the mid 50s when Alan left the industry, you know, because seduction of innocent and everything.
Right. Scared a lot of people off.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, a lot of people lost their jobs because
Sure.
a lot of, you know, things got canceled.
Right.
So these are actual letters from Stan Lee to Alan Bellman. So a lot of people see these in the case on exhibit and they assume that it's from Stan to me because
Right.
people know that I worked and filmed with Stan.
Right.
But no, their relationship was much closer than my relationship with Stan.
Sure.
But yes, we probably have about a half a dozen cards or letters that, you know, were Stan would send, you know, a Christmas card or a letter to Alan and his wife Roz, you know, saying, hey, you know, Joan and I are thinking of you, you know. Joan, of course, was Stan's wife. You know, they were all good friends. You know, we used to go out to dinner and
That's cool.
hang out and stuff back in the day. But yeah, it was great. You know, I've just heard so many great stories from Alan. But he gave us this. One of the things that we did acquire about 2 years ago, unfortunately, was after Alan had died, was Captain America 19. This was Alan Bellman's first work for Timely, his first work in the industry. And what was funny about that is he was 19 years old and his first work was Captain America 19.
Oh, my word.
Just what's the odds of that?
Right.
You know, and I ended up getting this from my friend, you know, Vince at Metropolis Comic Books had this book, and he tracked one down for me, and it's a 6.0 CGC. You know, to find a nice, you know, copy like that is just incredible. But yeah, like I said, you know, here's Alan's biography. This particular cap that you see here, this was. Alan would wear this at cons all over the country.
Right.
And people would bring him patches and pins and things like that. He would put them on his hat. And so, you know, he sent me the hat. You know, I mean, I think he knew.
Right.
He didn't have much longer.
Sure.
And, you know, he sent me these things. After he had passed, his wife Roz sent us his drawing desk. You'll see his desk here.
Yep.
And Hall of Heroes. But yeah, Alan.
He was such a lively person at his.
And his energy level at 95 was incredible.
It was absolutely amazing. I was standing there talking to him during the one con that we were at. And when we worked, I ended up talking to his wife for a little bit.
Right, yeah.
And so Alan goes, and he's like standing at his desk, and people are walking by. When people would walk by, he would yell out, "You're walking by a legend!" You know. So,
and that's how he was.
Yeah,
you know?
He was so great. And and if you don't know comics the way that some people do,
right? You
were walking by a legend. You had no idea because you know Stan Lee's name's on all these different things. Right. He did a lot of self promotion,
right?
Where Alan kind of more in the background. And I mean, even though he did a lot of things, I'm just saying he wasn't as prominent as Stan Lee.
Right. Exactly. No, definitely not. You know, I mean, Alan was. Alan wasn't one of the great iconic creators, but he was there at the beginning.
Right.
He was there when the things were happening. He had a very close relationship with Stan. You know, I mean, he was an artist for Stan. You know, he was probably Stan Lee's first artist.
Right.
That they worked together. You know, I mean, it was before, and it was just incredible history. And hearing these stories firsthand from Alan was amazing. And it was funny, the first time I met Alan, I'd already worked in film with Stan Lee previously, so I knew Stan. And just because a lot of people know that I'm a comic book historian, I was approached by, Mark at Grand Rapids Comic Con back probably about 10 years ago in 2014. And he approached me and he said, hey, I want to, at Grand Rapids Comic Con, do a Congressional Medal of Honor for Stan Lee and Alan Bellman. And I had never met Alan. I didn't really know much about Alan because, like I said, he wasn't one of the iconic creators. But he was one of the guys in the trenches, that didn't get that recognition and things like that, like so many other artists of that time.
And Mark wanted to make sure
exactly
knew about him.
Exactly. And so Mark said that he kind of was, he needed a comic book historian to write everything to go to the Senate, and go to the general to get it all signed off on. And he talked to several people, and several people told him to contact me. And so that's how Mark and I became really good friends. I mean, we promote each other's cons. We've been really good friends for like a decade now. So, he invited me out with the Screen Use Shield from the first Captain America film.
Yeah.
And to meet Alan, because Alan was going to be at Grand Rapids Comic Con. in 2014. And so, I went up to Alan. He was wearing this hat, and he had Captain America suspenders, and he had just all decked out in Captain America.
Right.
And just, little old man, and it's like, and I'm short, but, you can see here, Alan's even shorter than I am, so, I mean, you tell Alan was not a big guy.
No.
And it was great. So I went up to this table, him was Roz. Roz had her Wonder Woman gear on. He had his Captain America gear on, and they were just such a cute couple.
Yeah,
all dressed up in their red, white, and blue, their superhero gear. And it was amazing. Cute. And I made the comment to Alan, and this is the first time I meet Alan Bellman.
Yeah. So
I come up table, I introduce myself, tell him who I am. I'm like, man, I said, you're just totally geared up as Captain America. And he stands up and he's like, he goes, I got Captain America boxer shorts on too. Would you like to see me? And he was like this. And I'm like, oh my God, I love this guy, And it was and that was my first meeting with Alan Bellman,
wow.
And that's funny. And that's how he was, he was amazing. He was incredible. And, one of the things that I, because I do comics and World War II lectures at, universities and Comic-Cons. And one of the things that I talk about is that, the World War II vets are known as the greatest generation.
Right.
Stan Lee, Alan Bellman, these guys are examples why that is true. That is not just a saying. That is the absolute truth.
From that, let's move on to our next thing that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
Which is we go from 41 Captain America and up to into where are we at now?
Well, pretty much you had Submariner, you had Human Torch. Here's a Submariner 10. This is our earliest Submariner. So you had Submariner, you had Human Torch, you had Marvel Comics. We have several examples of Marvel Comics here. Young Allies. This is when the sidekicks kind of get. You got Bucky and Turo. And then you got, of course, the racist character, Whitewash Jones, was his actual character. He was one of the sidekicks. He'd run around with Bucky and Toro, and they had their gang of like regular kids that had no powers.
Right.
And, Whitewash Jones was one of them. It just, it's, you look at how they drew him. Totally racist.
Right.
Just a huge lips. And I mean, you can see it right on the cover there. And it was just totally racist. That kind of stuff would not be okay today. Not at all.
Well, yeah, and it wasn't okay back then. But
it wasn't okay back then. Yeah. No, that's true. That's a fair point. It was not okay back then. But yeah, Timely pretty much went on to that until about 1949. That's when superheroes fell out of favor at that point.
That's because the heroes are coming home from World War II.
Well, they came back in 45.
45.
Yeah, and then you've got the atomic bomb in 45 and then into 46,
right.
And then, everybody's coming home. They're not really reading the comics because during World War II, Captain America and Wonder Woman were the most popular characters for the soldiers during World War II because they, they're
warriors.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they were dressed like flag.
Right.
Red, white, and blue, you know. But Captain America was a soldier like them. He was a captain.
Yeah.
He only had a shield to protect him. And he wasn't like Superman, that was bulletproof and stuff like that. The soldiers could relate to him because he was a soldier. He was in the trenches. The way the stories were done, by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Joe Simon and Sid Shores and Alan Bellman, all of these guys, that was kind of, how they were, they were portrayed. They portrayed him as a soldier fighting the Nazis, in the trenches with them. Submariner usually was battling. So Captain America comics normally had Captain America fighting the Germans. Submariner was usually battling the Japanese. So this is a Japanese submarine cover, that he's taking out. So so it was interesting kind of how they did that, different parts of the war with different characters. How Marvel did that. But it was really interesting. So we're going to take just like a small commercial break right now. We're going to kind of reset our table here, and we're going to be back and we're going to talk about what replaced the superheroes going forward from 1949 into the 50s. And Marvel actually changes its name from Timely to another name, and we'll tell you about that when we get back as well.
And we'll be back right after I just always wanted to say that. Right after this. And we're back.
We're back.
So Alan got us through a lot of different information from the first part through from 39 up until basically 49.
Yep, 49.
There's a lot of things happening in there. So we're going to just take it from there. You're going to take it from there.
Sure.
And you're going to whip through these from 49 to 59, basically.
Right, exactly. So
we're going to end with something really cool.
We always end up with something really cool.
That's true.
Right?
But this one,
the whole thing's cool.
It's one of my favorites.
Okay. All right. So 49, superheroes are falling out of favor. And so people aren't buying superhero comic books. So, all the comic book publishers, not just Marvel, but DC, and Fawcett and everybody is trying to figure out, okay, what is the next thing that's going to sell?
Right.
So Marvel Comics number 92, this is the last issue. We do have that. We don't have the first issue, but, our 10 is our earliest. 92 is the last issue, which is rare because it was a short print run. And so we have that. What happens, though, is Marvel then goes from Marvel Comics, and in issue 93, this is issue 95. We don't have the first one, so they switched to like horror. And because horror was the big thing around this time, because EC Comics, of course,
Right.
was making it popular, and everybody's jumping on the bandwagon and copycatting pretty much. So Marvel did it as well. They kept the same, the original title, Marvel Comics. Issue 93 switched to horror. This is an issue 95. We have an issue 119 right here. But here's the other thing that happens is it's funny because right here this says a Marvel comic. But then if you look at this one here, it says Atlas. So Marvel changes their name from Timely to Atlas Comics in 51.
Before we go full on Marvel in the 60s.
Right, exactly.
We'll get to later.
Right. That'll be a different episode. Right, that'd be a different episode.
But
right,
it goes Timely, and then it goes Atlas. But Timely was actually putting out Marvel Comics, Marvel Tales.
Exactly.
They're actually putting out those, which is why we get that later.
Exactly.
But it goes from Timely into Atlas,
right,
and then we get the fun stuff.
Yeah. Atlas was a very short period. Atlas was from 1951 to 1960.
Right.
Is that they were called Atlas. So we're going to talk about some of the Atlas comics now, but of course we're still talking about Marvel. But what they did is, and again, this is all the companies in the 50s. They switched to horror, westerns, funny animals, romance, monsters, all of this stuff.
They're throwing stuff at the wall, see what sticks.
They are.
Because, throughout history, obviously, with entertainment, as it's gone through many, many different changes, before we had superheroes, it was your detective comics, your mysteries, your different things like that. People were really into those. Right. And so then once superheroes took over and then we had the war, then you got the guys coming back from the war. So then they're trying to figure out, what do people like? What, what is going to, kind of grab the masses?
Exactly.
And how can we sell the most of whatever they like?
Well, the other thing that kind of happened is TV starts.
Right.
In the 1950s.
Yeah.
So that has a huge influence on pop culture, comic books. This is a time in the 50s when you have character lunchboxes start coming out.
Right.
Like, in our lunchbox case, we have the first Superman lunchbox, Superman from 1954.
Fighting the robot.
But yeah, exactly.
Right.
You have like the Western comics.
Yeah.
You have Western TV shows.
Right.
In the 50s become popular, so Western comic books, of course, become popular.
Why would you not do it? Everyone's watching that, and if they're watching it on TV, which they had 3 channels, right? So you don't have much to choose from.
Right.
So you're watching Rawhide, you're watching Gunsmoke, you're watching all those Bonanza.
Those are more 60s ones, but yeah.
But so they get on board and they start
about the time John Wayne's career starts.
Right. Yeah, and his name's really not John Wayne, but
right, exactly, exactly. So so the Marvel, the Marvel Comics becomes Marvel Tales. Here's another kind of horror example of that. And then hand me that one right there, John.
Sure. This one's really cool.
This one's cool. So Journey into Mystery starts, which later introduces Thor, but before, because they didn't introduce Thor until issue 83. This is issue 62, which would be in the 50s, but this is the introduction, the first appearance of the Hulk, but not the Hulk that we know. This shaggy brown creature is what they call the Hulk. And again, another example where they recycle the name later.
But this one, number 62, am I correct in saying that this is the first time the word Hulk was ever used?
Right, this is the first Hulk in name.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So they're doing horror. They're doing, like
Monsters.
a lot of sci-fi monsters, aliens, things like that.
Sure.
Because this shaggy brown creature is like an alien that they're calling the Hulk.
Right.
But then, of course, they reuse the name. Just for those that are deep dive history people.
What does he end up becoming? Because this
They
character continues.
They do continue him, yes. So if you're familiar with the white creature, Zemu the Titan from the Defenders comics, this is his first appearance. But they called him the Hulk.
Right.
And they made him brown, not white. So they recycled the character as well as the name, but with different directions. Yeah. So just some of that weird deep dive history stuff.
Yeah, that's fun.
But that's interesting. We have that on Marvel's 50s case. But then here's some of the Western examples. You've got Black Rider and Kid Cold Outlaw. So these were some of the the popular Atlas Western comics of the 1950s, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
They even tried to bring back Captain America, Submariner, and Human Torch in the mid-50s. It only went like 3 issues. And they just weren't selling.
It wasn't catching on.
They tried to bring him back, and just 5 years after they stopped.
Right.
And it just didn't fly.
Yeah.
But they did create a couple of new characters.
Yeah.
Which were interesting. And so some of the new characters was Marvel Boy, which is the only superhero created in the 50s by Atlas, and it was by Stan Lee.
By Stan Lee.
This is Marvel Boy #1, and Marvel Boy only went 3 issues. So this is Marvel Boy's first appearance by Stan Lee, and we do have a copy, and obviously we have a copy in our archives. The other one, which was really cool, was the Black Knight. So they went back to like times of old. So you guys are probably all familiar with the Avengers Black Knight. This Black Knight is his ancestor from the actual times of King Arthur.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so he got this magical sword from Merlin. And so, they actually did Black Knight comic books. We have this really cool Bowen bust of the Black Knight, which is one of my favorite Bowen busts. It's so cool. But yeah, so this was kind of some of the stuff that they were doing in the 50s. And they were doing, like the funny animal comic books, the humor stuff. They were doing the romance comics. They were doing, and we have some, examples of that stuff. I just didn't grab some of that stuff, because there's just so much.
There's a lot. Yeah, and we've already put out a lot.
Right.
Also, I wonder, and I just wondered this, or I would have done the research beforehand, is that there's a very famous pinball game called the Black Knight. Okay. And it's a 2-level pinball game where there's your regular level, then there's a whole upper level, and it's very difficult. I've always found it to be one of the more difficult pinball games.
I've never seen
that. I kind of wonder if that was
is it
inspiration. It looks almost exactly like that.
Okay.
So I wouldn't understand why it wouldn't be from this.
You should ask Steve about that.
That would be very interesting.
Steve would know.
Yeah, I think he would know.
He's our resident pinball expert, of course.
Right,
but
arcade expert. Yeah.
Right, definitely arcade expert. He would definitely know.
Anyways.
So some of my favorite comics from Atlas in the 50s were these 2 right here. And these are photo covers, which is really interesting. Yeah, he goes there. Yep. He goes here. Okay, so, and we have a couple of the busts. And these are really cool because Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were like the main guys, at Atlas at this time. And so they did these photo covers. So the Black Rider cover, this is a photo cover. So this is from 1950. And this is Stan Lee in this getup as the Black Rider. So this is a young StanLee in here.
And not only do you not notice him because he has
the mask on and stuff, right?
But also because there's no gray hair. And
right. There's no mustache.
There's no mustache.
There's no porn stash.
Right.
Yeah, Stan doesn't have the porn stash yet at this point.
That's very interesting to me because there's a lot of people that come through the museum and I tell them that's Stan Lee and they're like, there's not even close. And it's like, well,
that's why we put the bust in front of the comic book when you see the exhibit.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, that helps out a lot.
But yeah, it was so cool. And the other thing is, technically, this is Stan Lee's first cameo.
Right.
Because he came in all the films. This is Stan's first cameo from 1950.
Right. He put himself
on the cover. Think about that, right?
It was very surprising that Stan Lee put himself on the cover of one of his own comics.
It's not a surprise.
No.
But what's funny is actually Jack Kirby did it a year earlier in 49.
Oh, okay.
So this is Jack Kirby and Joe Simon on this mobster cover.
Right.
Which is really cool. So he did in 49. And of course, the next year Stan's like, I need to be on a cover too. Exactly.
Of course
you can't outdo me. I need to be on a cover too.
Right, right.
But yeah, these are some of my favorite books. These actually took me a couple years to track these down. These books are very hard. to find. And we got lucky. We had a collection that came in about 3 years ago that had 2 of the Stan Lee covers.
Wow.
And I was able to trade one of them for the first appearance of Turok the Dinosaur Hunter, which was really cool at a show. And then this one we just got in a few months ago, the Jack Kirby one. One finally popped up on eBay, and I snagged it right away.
Right.
Because I've been looking for about 3 years. Yeah. Which is really cool.
It's awesome to have those 2 together.
It is. I mean, really we've got, and that's the thing. People,
and that's how we display it.
Right. Exactly. People know, it just seems like people are aware of the 40s history and the 60s history, of course, which we'll talk about in a later episode.
Right.
But the 50s gets overlooked.
Yeah.
You don't really hear about what happened in the 50s. Usually EC gets the main spotlight because, I mean, they were obviously the big.
They were the big ones.
Yeah. I mean, everything that happened was because of what they done.
Right.
And so you don't really hear about DC in the 50s other than, with DC you do because the George Reeves Superman show. Yeah. Right. Superman was huge in the 50s.
But that was
like Batman was in the 60s.
Right.
It was Superman in the 50s, all the merchandise.
But that was about it. There wasn't a lot of Marvel stuff going on. So this stuff that we brought you today, we are covering part of the history that you don't get to hear a lot about.
Right.
Like he said, you'll hear about the early 30s and the 40s stuff. But then Marvel gets kind of skipped over a little bit in the 50s. And it's because, I mean,
they didn't have a lot going on.
They didn't have a lot going on. But also, as you can see, they were throwing a lot at the wall trying to see what would stick. Yeah. But
and all the companies did that at that time. It wasn't just Atlas, Marvel, Timely.
Everybody was doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So, that brings us to the end of episode 2. I hope you enjoyed it. We went through, like I just said, from basically 39 to 59. Our next episode, not sure exactly. We probably will do the deep dive of the origin of DC and that kind of thing. So we'll just keep going back and forth, bringing you as much history as feasibly possible. So we hope you enjoyed the episode. Since we were talking about Marvel, we have Marvel Day, which is going to happen March 29th here at the Hall of Heroes Superhero Museum. We'll have cosplayers, and it'll be a lot of fun. Every time we have a specialty day, it's a lot of fun here. Bring the kids out and any of your comic book friend nerds and let them all know that we're here to have a good time. So we also have our Comic-Con coming up, so you can check our links and go to that and see what amazing artists and new announcements. And so go to those and make sure that you're checking those out and we'll keep you updated and go there and keep yourself updated and make sure you grab your tickets early for our Comic-Con.
So actually for comic fans, we just announced we actually have a legend coming this year, Jim Starlin. Yeah. Creator of Thanos, Drax the Destroyer, and Gamora from Guardians of the Galaxy, Shang-Chi Master of Kung Fu, so many characters. I mean, and he was one of my favorites growing up. Yeah. And I'm so excited to have him here. And of course, he'll be our award winner for this year for the Hall of Heroes History Award.
Spoiler alert. I know.
Jim's not watching this.
You don't know. Maybe this is his favorite podcast.
Maybe,
his favorite new podcast. All right, so for Alan Stewart, I am John Osborne. This has been the Hall of Heroes History, and so are we. We're history, and enjoy your comics.